Hi everyone, this is your week 3 video where we start to explore the mechanics of breath. So you remember from our stretching video in week 1 that we want to sort of prepare the body for a more robust level of breathing activity. And that's why you have things like the invisible ladder to help you make sure that your rib cage is nice and buoyant in your torso, and also the position of having hands on hips to facilitate that open expansion. So before you start to play around with the explorations in this video, why don't you take a moment to just remind your body and your brain that for excellent, highly athletical breathing, we want to feel a 360-degree expansion in the rib cage that is created by the external intercostal muscles, for those of you who love anatomy. And at the same time, so those external intercostals contract in order to make space in your rib cage and move the ribs outward. At the same time, we need the abdominal wall to be completely released so that the diaphragm can descend downward and there's not any resistance in the body. If you're having trouble feeling exactly what this feels like, try the opposite and really draw those abs in. Think about pulling your belly button toward your spine. Hold your abs super tight and try to take a really big breath. You'll probably feel a lot of tension in the body and a lot of resistance to that breath. So this kind of softening in the abdomen can sometimes feel a little bit tricky. If you're really having a hard time identifying it, you may try to lie on your back with your knees bent and see if you can find a little bit of release in those abdominal muscles, especially if you grew up dancing or being a gymnast. You might have a lot of habitual kind of structural engagement that you were trained to incorporate from a really young age. So don't be afraid if you feel like you're having a hard time feeling it, but we need to know that in order to sing, especially to sing classical styles, that we really need to have that release of the abdominal wall so that everything that is required for breathing can move the way it's designed to move. And the note that I have on my card here is that it's especially difficult to take a really quick breath, which we need a lot for singing because you only have, an eighth rest or something really fast. If your abs are still holding on, it's almost impossible to get a useful breath in the time that you have. One other experiment that you can try is to imagine that breathing starts with the expansion of your ribs. Theoretically, it kind of does. Ribs and diaphragm move first and create that vacuum where air goes in. This is another way to explore the idea that our breath does not need to be pulled in or sucked in or drawn in. In fact, nature will take care of itself. And if your body is well aligned and sort of ready for really coordinated breathing, it's going to do it. Another way that we can work on this is by practicing breath depletion, which is a thing that happens naturally when we sing and is a little bit tricky to get used to because our body is sort of designed to send a lot of warning signals when we're running low on air. So it's very natural that as you sort of come to the end of a phrase or the end of your breath, you'll start to feel a collapse in the chest or tension in the body as your body tries to conserve air, which really isn't helpful in the pursuit of vocal tone. So to practice this, what you can do is, we've experimented with this in the studio when we blow the leaf down the street. Same idea. You just want to blow out the air that you have, making sure that breath out is coming from your abdomen and not from just collapsing your ribs. And then once all your air is out, hold yourself in that empty state for 5 to 10 seconds. And then notice what happens when you do finally release that sense of holding empty and let the breath sort of return into your thoracic cavity as it's designed to. It's best to repeat that maybe 2 or 3 times in a row to sort of get used to that feeling that, aha, I feel the instinct to squeeze, but I don't need to move all my air out. And then once I'm empty, all I need to do is decide that air is going to come in. And there it goes. No gasping, no sucking, right? Not helpful. Another way that we can do this is to start to add sound to this sort of air depletion activity. So you can start, if you're feeling a little bit anxious about it, you can start with just an unvoiced consonant like an S, and sort of notice what happens to your body as you sustain, 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 sustain. When you're finished, hold that empty. And then see what happens on the inhale. Again, these exercises are not what happens during singing, but they're to help you understand the way your body responds to air moving in and air moving out. You do not hold your breath while you are singing. Just want to make that super clear. The next phase of that depletion conditioning is to sing until, or to do a phonated sound until you are out of air. So the easiest one is to do a 5-note scale, and you're just going to go up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down until you run out of air, and then let the air come in. So again, this is a way to sort of monitor the body's instinct to collapse. And this is one of those moments where the brain needs to tell the body, you're okay, you're not dying, we're doing this on purpose, and you'll get air in just a second. So you can pick a lip trill or a zzz, but we're just going to do a 5-note scale wherever it's comfortable for you. So I'm just going to pick a note out of the air that feels super easy to do. Etc., 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 etc. The idea is you want to be on the lookout for those urges to collapse, and you want to remind your body that that is not an essential part of this process. Air comes in, air goes out, body stays buoyant and heavy. The next exploration involves switching from unvoiced to voiced consonants. So an unvoiced consonant is just air moving through a shape. So examples are s, f, th, and sh. If you notice, take yourself through those, and in each of those instances, we're just moving air. There's no engagement of anything happening in the laryngeal system at all. S, f, th, sh. What we're going to do is practice sustaining one of those unvoiced consonants, pick whichever one's your favorite, for about 10 to 20 seconds. So we're going to review the mechanics. We want that 360-degree expansion in the ribs. Don't forget that you have a back and that it also moves in response to your breath. And don't forget about that soft abdomen. As we're sustaining our consonant of choice, we're going to think a little bit about maintaining buoyancy in the rib cage. This is really tricky to talk about because what we're looking for is a delay of the collapse, like we talked about a minute ago, but without creating tension or rigidity. So I sometimes ask people to consider organ bellows or the a fiery thing under a hot air balloon or squeezing your toothpaste from the bottom of the tube. We're going to think about that breath energy moving from underneath and leaving the ribs buoyant and floaty for as long as they can, right? So let me see if I can do this for you. I'm going to find a nice expansion, and I'm just going to use because it is the least tickly in my mouth. Etc., etc., etc. So if you're paying really, really, really close attention, you will see that absolutely my ribs must come in toward the end of my breath, especially because we're not doing a breath depletion exercise here. We're just sort of coordinating inhales and exhales. Remember that your inhale can be small, medium, or large, but that all your inhales must cooperate with human design. It's a rule. So you don't need to take in a big giant breath to sustain an unvoiced consonant for 10 to 20 seconds. You can experiment with a small or a medium breath to see what that feels like. As I'm allowing the lower part of my abdomen to move air first, eventually my ribs must sort of recoil, that's the biological term, elastic recoil, must sort of return to their starting position after being expanded by all of that air. So we're not going to hold our ribs out and stay stuck there forever and let something happen beneath. We're going to just make sure that the movement initiates from lower and that the ribs are the last thing to sort of gently drape back inwards to where they came from. So explore that a little bit. Choose any unvoiced consonant that you like and experiment with small and medium breaths and that sensation of sort of emptying from the bottom up. You can then start to experiment with rhythmic patterns. So again, I'm going to take a small breath and I'll just do some eighth notes and triplets. I'll just make something up. So as I experiment with different bursts of air, my body responds in different ways. So that's really worth your time to sort of notice what's happening in your system when you take that beautiful mindful inhale and then start to move air very directively in a very directed manner. Last, you're going to grab your metronome app and you're going to go to 60 beats a minute, which I'll do right now. Nice and peaceful, sedate, 60 beats a minute. Quarter note equals 60. And what I'm going to do now is start to alternate between voiced consonants, the unvoiced consonants and their voiced counterparts. So the counterpoint of s is z. The counterpart of f is v. Th goes to v. And sh goes to zh. So I'm going to pick a pair. I'm not going to try to go through all of them, although, if you love challenging yourself and want to keep those neural pathways alight, by all means. So I'm just going to use s and z right now, and I'm going to change the consonant when the metronome changes. So I'm going to take a regular breath with my beautiful expansion. S, z, s, z, z, z. And again. I maybe went a little too long that time. You're allowed to stop anytime you need to take a breath. Again, we want to avoid any sort of feeling of tension, grabbing, holding, squeezing, oh goodness, panic physiology. The idea is, I'll turn my metronome off so we don't go a little batty. The idea is that we want to find a really smooth flow of air that doesn't stop and isn't interrupted as we switch from unvoiced to voiced. So I'll do sh and zh this time to sort of show you what I mean. And I'm thinking of, we've used this analogy before, this image of the magician who has just scarves and scarves and scarves that never stop coming out of his mouth. So I'm also going to make my pitch just a tiny bit higher to see if that helps me feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit like I can maintain the flow all the way through. So all I'm doing is blowing, 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 blowing. And sometimes there's a little bit of vibration in my vocal folds and sometimes there's not. But what this is helping me to coordinate is how much air do I need to bring in? How much air does it take to actually articulate that consonant? And then just sort of watching that process, do it multiple times so that you can really observe what's happening. For those of you who have asked questions about expanding your breath capacity or being able to do longer phrases or just feeling like you have better control over your breath, we're going to replace the word control with coordination. So it's really all about the coordination of inhale, exhale, muscle activity, avoiding tension, sound, this all also is affected by the way that we make sound. So this last exercise from unvoiced to voiced has a little bit of a sense of what we're going to start to look at next week as we look at the systems of phonation. So revisit this many times, play around with the exercises, and see what you can see.